Welcome to the Insight Dialogue community, the Vesak Day gathering has been going on for the entirety of Vesak Day, which began as the globe was turning many, many hours ago. A holiday is a practice of shared intention. It's people coming together with a common aim of the mind. And the theme of the holiday is what aims the mind, right? So the mind could be aimed towards patriotism or towards a divinity. The mind could be aimed towards the memory of those who have died, a memory of nature and spring. But it's weaving together minds. It's a shared practice. It's a communal practice. And so as I'm speaking now, this is an aiming process among us, all of us. Aiming the mind towards, generally, human goodness and something quite profound that is variously called freedom, liberation, awakening. The key feature in my heart of the Vesak Day, and indeed of the Dhamma, is that it's gathered around the Buddha's humanity, not divinity. There's much that is mysterious, there's much that is beyond words, but it all is rooted in humanity. The symbol of this, or shall I say the marker of this, is that what we're actually celebrating is the Buddha's birth. How human can you get? Some gooey, slimy baby came out of a mother, a human being. And however much we may feel this profound respect and regard for the Dhamma, babies are babies. You know, babies poop and they nurse and they cry. And they express their humanity, which is hunger and survival. Just like you, just like me. Slimy, we were all slimy, beautiful, wonderful, smeared up, and tender, touched by the air, touched by the sounds, from the mother's heartbeat out into this incredible elaboration of life, of things banging, things touching the nose, all those smells, light touching the eyes, and the operation of a body mind, the operation of a body mind, not self, not self, little tiny baby, not self. Nothing there but process. And we can see that. We can see that if you've had children, you can see it. If you can imagine back, that doesn't mean there's no personality. There's plenty that's determined by genetics, and then the environment picks it up. Fine. It's just process. human process. So here's this birth, like our birth. Like if you feel yourself sitting, if you feel yourself hearing and you're noticing that your mind is working as I'm speaking, that's humanity. It's that simple. And that's what connects us. And on Vesak Day, it's this opportunity to remember that birth and to say, wow, what happened to this person? To remember that this person lived this life that had this other major marker at the age of 35 of awakening. But to go there now is to kind of jump the queue, you know? We need to feel our way towards that. But we know, because with the benefit of hindsight, that that's where this human experience is headed. Because that's where our capacity lies, right? That's this reflection. That's Vesak Day, as we reflect together as a community, that we all share this. And just like the Buddha, we rely on spiritual friends. Yeah, the Buddha did too. So, what was that like to grow up in Iron Age India and be in a tribe? You know, his father was a like a important person in the tribe. He wasn't a king or anything. There were kings. Kingships were beginning to form in northern India. But he was from a small village, and his dad was important in the village, but under the rule of a king, right? So, but the life of, food and other people and, competing, things competing for one's attention, learning processes, learning how to shoot arrows and how to relate to friends and what's proper and not proper to do at the table. Just like you and me. But we can, I think, safely assume that this human being had some extraordinary qualities. Now, I don't know how far we want to go in making up stories. There are many, many myths, shall we say, of all the past lives that prepared him for that moment. I'm not going to speak about what's true or not true. What I care about for us is what's useful. And what's useful is to, reflect on such a mind, such a heart, such a being that would, without question in my mind, have begun his inquiry, as thinking processes began to be coherent in this infant, that already there were tendencies towards exceptional clarity, awareness, self-awareness, sensitivity, intelligence, but all in a human form and all subject to the demands of a body-mind, hormonal systems, digestive systems, neural development, oxytocin for bonding, adrenaline when he was scared, cortisol when he was stressed. Come on, right? Do you think that that was not true? It's just 2,000 years, 2,500 years ago, not that long ago. So human is human. But the search was every instant. I'm absolutely convinced of it. And I touch that, as I speak that to you, I invite you into this sense of, wow, as I'm even listening to Gregory speak now, this search is happening, this sense of, it's not search like, oh, I have to get this thing to be better. It's a sense of possibility in this, in this very life. Like that the features of delusion and ignorance could be minimized, could be lifted. This feeling of possibility, because one is in touch with when one is deluded. It's important to be honest or you'll never get anywhere. So, in celebrating Vesak and this aspect of birth, we're, birthing into a life. We're aware of our own lives, of saying, okay. And the canonical story of the messengers that theoretically the Buddha leaves this completely sequestered palace and sees a very sick person and says to his horseman, is that going to happen to me? Yeah, that's going to happen to you. It sees an aging person, illness and death, sees a corpse. Is this going to happen to me? Yes, it's going to happen to you. And then beginning, some like really intense search. But we can be certain that the Buddha, that Gotama wasn't a Buddha, was a human being, had a name, was, saw death and disease. But it began to sink in. And so we ask ourselves, like here and now, do we, you and I, let it sink in? We'll get to death later, but let's just, let this story about the messengers kind of churn inside us a little bit. Do I recognize that there's a message or there's a guidance in this fragility of the body? Taking us beyond what the Buddha called the pride of good health, the pride of youth. Kind of this, I can certainly relate to that, how arrogant and like I didn't know how healthy I was. I didn't know how strong I was. I didn't know that it was a big deal to be able to, walk somewhere or lift something up or do something and have nothing hurt and have no loss of energy with that, whatever the things of youth were for you and are for you. It's all passing. Do we feel ourselves living the truth of that, the truth of this passingness, this impermanence, this human fragility, aging and illness? That's what that is, right? But the message is like, okay, let's really live this path now. The message is not just live the path now, right? That's the message. It's a great reflection for a full moon day in May. You know that sense in the story of the Buddha saying, wow, is all this suffering, is there any way out of it? And he actually leaves home. So we want to touch that sense of how would he give up everything, including, at this point, a wife, a child, a good position, guaranteed comfort and safety, and not perfect safety, of course, that's never guaranteed, but he was privileged. He wasn't a king, but he was, privileged. So we want to touch that sense of, wow, this human situation is really in its the form that I've experienced it as, wouldn't have this language, but unawakened, is really, really full of suffering. And it wasn't just aging, illness, and death. It was this relentless urging of the body mind for the next thing. It was far more subtle than aging and death, but it included aging and death, right? Have you ever had the feeling of you wake up and it's, oh, another day? Not, oh, another day, but oh, another day. More work to do, whether, let's say, when you're a parent, you've got more kids to take care of, or when you've got a house, you got to clean the house again. I mean, even, oh God, I got to brush my teeth. Sometimes this just goes on and on. One sees this clearly when one experiences, let's say, depression or some kind of disaster in one's life, and all of the weight comes down on you. Then there's no room in the system to just ignore it. But in the perspective of this life, and then expanding out to the perspective of lifetimes, which was the dominant belief in the Buddha's time, and may very well be true, whether we like it or not. And if it's true, then everything I'm saying goes on and on and on like that. More birth, more sorrow, more loss, more death, more inequity, more injustice, more scrambling for a living, more temporary satisfactions that give you a little break, and then you go on and, you go back to, trying to make it all work out. And it just goes on, and then you die, and then you're reborn, and then you do it again. Right? So let's not lose that perspective. It's like, wow. Right, in your face dukkha, if you are willing to touch that. But the value of touching that, that first noble truth, dukkha, the value of touching that is you say, wow, is there any other possibility in this human experience besides that? Is there any other possibility? Wow, it's a serious question. Serious enough that even though the Buddha had, as I said, was developing this young man's life at the age, are you ready for it, of 29, he leaves a wife and a young child and a life. Now, from our perspective, contemporary culture, leaving a wife and a child is really a questionable action. I would not feel good about that. It's not my way. But then again, I didn't live in that culture, and I didn't have the exact experience of insight or understanding of this human condition and the intensity of urge for search. But in a patriarchal society, even more patriarchal than the one we're living in, if you can imagine that, the women would have taken care of the children. It was that kind of thing. It wasn't our contemporary set of values. And of course, from a historical Buddhist perspective, looking back, you look at the millions or billions of people that have been influenced by the insights that came from that for a greater good. You can kind of, let's just not look away from him having left a wife, a child, a potential leadership position in his subculture. Let's just not, paste over it. Let it, even if it's confusing or you feel some doubt, that's okay. That's part of the humanity too. But now let's get back into the sense of search. 29 years old, human being, has at this point, in my estimation, for you can take it any way you want, at that age, someone of that sensitivity and intelligence and capacity would already be in constant search, in constant turmoil, even with the problem of his own suffering, human suffering, and seeing the dysfunction around him, seeing people try to, the wealthy people trying to kind of paste over their suffering with sensual pleasures, the lack of privilege, the inequity. He would see the poverty for sure. He would have seen people starving and see that he wasn't. He would see it injustice, not just, personal suffering. He would see all of that. And all of that is what we're talking about when we talk about liberation. So if you would rather compare him to a revolutionary figure, you could well do that. It would be very profitable. It says, okay, I'm going for it. Gives it all up. And you have this episode. You have 6 years from 29 to 35. Strong, as they say in the discourses, black hair, his body was upright, his skin was golden. You have all of this, like, you get a picture of vitality. And remember, walking from place to place, and this is where the spiritual friendship comes in, because he had to start with teachers. Even the Buddha, he was searching. He didn't know what to do. His dad just wanted him to be a king. He said, no, I don't want to do that. I'm like this, like suffering everywhere. And his dad was super upset and wanted to control him. Sound like a modern drama? His dad wanted him to, take his position in the business. And he left. And so he didn't have any, it's not like, sure, there would have been other education. He would have had an education. And there's indications, historical indications, that maybe, some of the travel between, the intellectual activity, let's say around Greece and through Persia would have, made its way to India back and forth. And so he might have had some aspects of his education that are pretty interesting. We don't know. But for sure, he didn't have the guidance into the depths of the mind. And he had to go get guidance from spiritual friends, from teachers, just like you and me. Wasn't a bolt of lightning that came down and awakened him. He had to work for it. Now, this is interesting because he really worked for it. With our kind of modern, kind of sometimes sensitive, protected life that we live of privilege, it would be hard for us to sense into what it would mean to enter the ascetic practices, to be on the road, to intentionally basically starve yourself close to death, to meditate with such intensity that, as there's a repeating passage in the suttas that's like, may the flesh just stick to my bone lest I give up this, powerful effort. I mean, this is not, oh, don't try too hard, just relax, right effort has to be balanced. So you just gotta, take your time, nothing to do, nowhere to go. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that. It was like, bam. It was like that, just like boom. Now, this may be different from what you or I ever would do or need or whatever. This is not a judgment of that. It's, again, trying to look at it in a way where we can sort of be realistic, touch the humanity of it, and feel what is vibrating in us in this sense of the Buddha's birth and soon the awakening. But let's not jump there, right? So we want to. So he went from one teacher to another, and the story is that at each teacher, he learned the practices of mental development and cultivated his mind to the point where he attained all that the teacher could teach, was invited to teach in those communities because he was obviously so gifted, and said, no, I was still suffering here. This isn't it. I'm not done. And he would leave and walk to other teachers that he had heard about and had to find. Probably you don't have the stories of the ones he went to that were bogus, and he would leave them after a week or two and says, oh, this person's full of nonsense. You've probably had to do that. I've seen plenty of bogus teachers. So he had to do that. Talk about that. And then he would go to another one, and one gets the sense of successive layers of subtlety, depth, and, shall we say, skill. And after arriving with his, last spiritual friend, his last guiding teacher, and attaining to various absorptions and extraordinary meditative experience for sure. Same thing. Still saw that the body mind was somehow still trapped, still in the cycle. He could feel it. He knew it. Can you sense the honesty there? All of these fantastic experiences, there's no doubt that he had countless ecstatic experiences. There's no doubt that he spent long times in bliss. There's no doubt in my mind at all that others would see this and come to him, and so he was being extolled, he was being honored. He had the whole thing going on, but he knew. Like, touch that honesty for yourself. do we really sense the status of our inner world? I said, no, still work to do. That's kind of the language in the discourses. There's still work to do. Very earthy, you know? So he says, okay. And now we come to the famous episode where he says, I'm just going to sit down here. I'm not going to get up until I got this right. And it is a beautiful image that I appreciate that so many people have seen the fact that he was under a tree and is, kind of bonded with nature. Because I feel for myself, when I go into nature, something lets go, something bigger than me, something, that you could even say is vast and mysterious and sacred. And it's doing its work in ways that my rational mind can't understand. But at least I can say, okay, there's some environmental calming. It's a kind of the way one experiences in relational meditation, in relation with nature, that vastness. And you know what he also did? This is symbolically very important in Buddhist traditions all over the world. He let go of the ascetic practices. He realized that by self-torture, intense self-denial, and indeed self-harm, that this was not the way. This was not the way to break through understanding. And in fact, there's a kind of obsessiveness about it. And so he let that go. He ate food. Rice milk, milk rice, maybe it was called, and I don't know for you, but I want to share with you that when I contemplate that part of the story, I feel the comfort food enter me. I feel this kind of soothing coming through my body, and my body is inhabited with this, or infused with this warmth and comfort. I remember my grandmother used to make rye toast that I identified as grandma toast. And, it was just rye bread toasted with butter on it. But there was something, like that, And so now you sense the nature, the kindness to his own body, self-kindness, and he settles. The body-mind settles, and you can feel your own body-mind settle. Maybe now, And as he meditates, he discovers a quality of pleasure that is worthy of pursuing, of following. A pleasure not based on outer conditions. And the body-mind settles into and through those absorptive states. And this is a kind of a pointer for the nature of extraordinary practice. So we don't want to jump over this moment, because we're approaching this awakening, right? And it tells us something about formal meditation and about how to live. right? So he'd been living on the road, remember now, for 6 years. And so for him, his whole life path was, one intense path. But now, that aspect of the path that's coming to fruition, we've got the plenty of effort and energy and diligence and, right mindfulness, and he's got all that. His morality, utterly impeccable, totally supports this moment without remorse. And this ease is coming in, ease. And now the mind is aimed by that ease and dropping down. And the mind becomes still enough to become aware of its most subtle function and how the mind grabs the body mind. So the whole thing, the body mind grabs at each moment. He's seeing that. And he's still continuing to relax from it. And yet the mind is crystal clear and calming and clear. And it's supported, remember now, by this whole background that has conditioned this moment and nature. And there's a dropping beneath the entire trance of becoming, where all of that, even the smallest holding or gripping, has let go, and the entirety of the veil of ignorance of being unawakened is penetrated, and the not self empty nature of body mind, of human experience, is recognized. And all of the intoxication, the hunger, lets go right there. And he experiences this same human being that we've been talking about, experiences this. And again, let's let ourselves be challenged by, for those of you who are challenged, perhaps like me, that there's a reviewing of past lives. There's a seeing that happens, a capacity to see what could not be seen otherwise. Now, who am I to say that's not true? That's a myth. This is where I let go. I let you go off into your mystery and invite you to not throw that out. I invite you to the extent that it's difficult or challenging, let it challenge you. Let the sense of what this life is now, past lives, future lives, however you want to talk about it, or just psychologically, moment by moment, life being reborn and reformed. So you can have a psychological, more contemporary perspective on that, and it's still enormously valuable. Or you can allow yourself to, open to this mystery, this unknown place. Either way, when this experience of awakening happens, now this is a distinct shift. This is not just another experience. This is a distinct shift. Modern day kind of simile or analogy, if you will, is the Wizard of Oz. You've got this whole magical kingdom full of suffering and evil witches and stuff. But the point is, what happens when you pull back the curtain and you see the guy who's fabricating all of this? Could you ever forget that that's how it is? So I ask you, if you see through the illusion of self-fabrication and all of the suffering and hunger that comes from it, even for an instant, could you ever forget? How? It seems impossible to me. Now, habit mind may take over again. That's why we have a path, and the path continues. So, now, this is not just Gotama. This is the one who has awakened, the one who understands. And that's what he calls himself, the awakened one, the Buddha. So now he's referred to as the Buddha. And it's a very charming scene where he says, oh God, this is pretty subtle stuff. I don't think anybody's going to believe this stuff. And it just would be so much like, it would be tiring. It would be difficult. No one's going to get it. I think I'll just hang out. And mythically, again, you've got the most powerful god in the pantheon of gods of that time comes down. Now, of course, this is propaganda. Now I'm judging, now I'm saying my view because it happens to be the biggest god so that everybody will respect the Buddha. That's sort of the political move of it. But the point is, he said, no, you should go teach. There are some that will get it. But I would really internalize that and say that, as the Buddha had, after this stuff settled in him for a while, he said, wow, this is really important. This is possible for all beings. Like, wow, really? And so regardless of my own pleasure and comfort, I'm going to do this. And I really want to again invite you to sense into what happens here. He gets up and he goes and he starts just walking. He says, the first people he thinks of is, these 5 that I used to hang out with. We were all good buddies in the work. And they might get it. Well, some have died, and talked to the ones that he saw, and they didn't want to respect him. They said, he started eating. He didn't uphold the ascetic stuff. He started indulging himself. Totally like, judgmental, very, very kind of narrow-minded, self-satisfied spiritual people, but human, He says, no, don't even stand up for him. If he wants to come over and hang out with us, he can do that. And apparently they couldn't help but stand up when he got there. And I have no doubt that he carried a sense of presence that was palpable. And he offers his teaching. He sets the wheel in motion, as it were. But what I really want to convey here, what I really want us to reflect on Vesak Day, is that this is the first move of 45 years of nonstop walking around sharing the Dhamma for the benefit of others only. He didn't have to do this. Wow. It's like, occasionally he would get a day off, or, he would go off on retreat. And, there were times when he would just disappear for a little while. He was, maintaining his own path, his well-being. And he was doing much more than that. He was showing by example that this maintenance, increase, this honoring of a spiritual life is important, right? So he was teaching the teachers, the monks, the nuns, and he was showing by example, that a life without, agenda. So we have a sense of this awakening of a human being and our capacity for awakening. And now we're sensing into, on this Vesak Day, a life of service, a life of being surrounded by spiritual friends, of working together to unfold, to share a vision of what we might call superhuman, but that doesn't do it justice. It doesn't do us justice. It's a life of fully human. It's a life of our full human capacity, not something that is outside of your reach, of my reach. It's very easy to let ourselves off the hook by saying, that's only for special people. Any kind of awakening or deeper understanding, even a finer morality. Poor schlep like me, Nah. That's kind of an easy way out. But if we recognize that we just do what we can, we offer what we can, we give what we can, we live as best we can, and we sense that as we do so, this path is alive, then all of a sudden it's like the path is real. So the next phase is this 45 years, during which time the beauty, the inspiring quality of the Buddha's personhood and what he was teaching, the Buddha and the Dhamma, the personhood and the Dhamma he was teaching, gave rise to a Sangha. So while the Buddha had been dependent, just like you and I, on spiritual friends and guides, companions in the holy life, he saw this is essential. You can't do it without that. And so he wanted to provide the conditions because I think quite realistically, he knew most people would not be self-awakened in the way he was. That's a rare thing, not impossible, but rare. And so over these 45 years, as he was teaching, he was establishing the conditions for a community of spiritual friends, just like us, to sustain the Dhamma and to make the conditions ripe and rich for seeing our confusion, for seeing our partialness, for seeing where we're unawakened, because that's what happens when we're together. That's where it's difficult, right? But that brings it out. And to provide the conditions of love and compassion and care for the awakening process, the release process, the understanding process, the ripening process to unfold. That's exactly what we're doing here in this very moment and in this community. And we look forward to the end of this 45 years, and what do we see? Kind of the ultimate leveling experience of death. So, can you allow that sense of mortality to bind us together? Can you allow it to spark a sense of urgency? I feel that, you know, with cancer and multiple cancers and all that stuff. So I've been lucky. I hope you have a gentler luck, or just to know it. But somehow this organism resists confronting death. You know, we want to exist forever. We want to think that, you know, all the people that we love or care about, we can always be with them, or that we'll always have time to do the stuff we want to do, or that we just imagine to the point of death and we just can't imagine not being here. And we get a kind of a little stomach ache when we think about it and say, oh, yeah, I think I'll have a cup of tea. That would be much easier than really reflecting on death. And we go have a cup of tea. But we got close, you know. But death is here. That's just how it is. But that's a beautiful thing. It's remembered on Vesak Day. This is also the day when the Buddha died, they say. Birth, awakening, death. And death. Very human, right? The Buddha's body stopped working. It would have rotted right there in place, but they burned it. So, brings you kind of back to the humanity, doesn't it? He died. And, you know, before he died, he lived to be quite old, 80. He lived to be 80 years old, which at that time was pretty spectacular. But before he died, he saw a lot of his friends die. Sariputta, his wisest disciple. And he said, you know, the world is dark. The world's not going to be the same without Sariputta. Wow. You know, he saw others die. He saw war. He knew death. We can know death. So, what a brilliant and beautiful panorama for us of humanity and awakening. And so Vesak Day invites us to this kind of re-examination and ultimately recommitment to this path of awakening individually in the ways that we, can sense into seeing through the magic show. And when we see through the magic show, when we come, with our spiritual friends helping us along the way, how is that manifest? What's it like to be in relationship and have the relationship not driven by hunger? So, wow. Like, you don't have to entertain me. I don't have to entertain you. This is not about filling an empty hole. This is like we're together in this brilliance, in this possibility, and our relationship flows. And now, when I am with anyone, I sense that relatedness. I feel it. The mind has been freed and opened, and feeling that relatedness with these beings, with everyone I meet, of course I'm going to feel their pain. Of course I'm going to feel their joy. Of course the body-mind will vibrate with that. So this is the natural manifestation of metta, of karuna, of compassion and joy, sympathetic joy. And it doesn't stop there, though, because I feel through that channel of opening to you and you opening to me, we open to everyone's humanity. Perhaps like me, you've sensed as your path ripens a tenderness of heart regarding the suffering throughout the world. I absolutely do. I mean, I'm crying all the time now with what's going on in the world. Not literally all the time, but every day, multiple times. I'm touched by the pain that I feel around me, and not just immediately, I mean globally. I was much, much more comfortable, or so I thought, in my individuality. But I was also ignorant. And so this awakening process that we're talking about calls us to a totality of awakening that doesn't look away from any of it. So I invite us also into that recognition, that reflection. And I hope that your sense of Vesak Day animates your path, lets you feel the possibility in this very life of something profoundly good. Every moment is part of the path. And we see all the little ragged moments, and we see the good ones. And we think about all beings everywhere, that they too might benefit from our efforts, that they may have freedom as well. Be free from sorrow, loss, that they may find comfortable homes to live in, have enough food, that they might have safety, physical safety, psychological safety. May all these beings be free. May there be peace. May there be peace. May there be peace. I hope your Vesak day unfolds beautifully. What a wonderful community. Thank you, friends.